um, uh, gave a speech, many of you may be familiar with it, about the Holocaust, and said, of course, it's a sham, and said it's not only is it a sham, but historians who try to prove the truth are sued, and this is what happened to David Irving. So in my book, I cite that, as a twisting of the truth. And then, of course, you have Hutton Gibson, the father of Mel Gibson, who is an outright denier, who repeats many of the arguments that Irving makes. And when that became publicized about Hutton Gibson, it made Hutton Gibson look like a complete fool. Mel Gibson was more dangerous in some of his interviews, because when he was pushed on this, he said, do I believe that there were camps where many Jews died? Yes. And of course, that is, I'm looking, he said here, in an interview with Reader's Digest, he responded to the question, the Holocaust happened, right? By saying, yes, of course. Atrocities happened. War is horrible. The Second World War killed tens of millions of people. Some of them were Jews in concentration camps. Many people lost their lives. That's Holocaust denial. It's soft-core Holocaust denial. Because atrocities happened, wars happened, first of all, that's, sort of nobody did them. War is horrible. The Second World War killed tens of millions of people. Some of them were Jews in concentration camps. Many people lost their lives. That's because it denies the idea of a planned program to annihilate the Jewish people. Then later on in a television interview, he said, do I believe that there were concentration camps where defenseless and innocent Jews died? They didn't die, they were murdered cruelly under the Nazi regime? Of course I do. I do absolutely. It was an atrocity of monumental proportions. Once again, Jews died as being deliberately murdered. So you have that kind of thing still, but he was excoriated for that. He was really excoriated for that. But in the Islamic world, it still goes on, and it's very disturbing.
Just one question: how do you personally deal with that?
How do I personally deal with it?
Yeah.
I beat the bastard, I don't know. I get very. Sometimes it's overwhelming, but most of the time it's.
Anybody showing around your lectures?
Huh?
Anybody
Challenge me?
orally?
Sometimes he showed up at one of my lectures. He doesn't show up anymore. Irving.
No, but others.
Others? No, not really, because the judgment, all I do is start reading to them from the judgment, which is also on the website. If you read the judgment, it's over 300 pages long. Go to part 13, which is the judge's decisions, and it's just overwhelming. He doesn't leave the guy standing. He just, sort of lays him low completely.
You don't counter any...
I encounter some of it, but, it's hard to, I don't know, the people who would question maybe that they don't confront me, no, but the judgment, that's what was so wonderful about having a judge decision, a bench decision, and that also came about. Anthony Julius, who made a point never of talking to Irving, never addressing him or anything, went up to him in one pretrial hearing and said, as things were evolving and developing, he said, Mr. Irving, this is a very complicated case. It's very difficult, and it's going to be tens of thousands of documents. There were over 100 linear feet of documents. And Irving said, yes, you're right. And Anthony was like, much too complicated for a jury. They'll never be able to read all the documents and the reports. He said, you're right. Don't you think we should just have a bench trial? Yes, you're right. So Anthony said, Mr. Irving and I both request a bench trial. Which of course was to our advantage. Not that a jury trial would have been more difficult, because there's no way of knowing if they would have read these thousands of pages. A, and B, in a jury trial you don't get a judgment. You don't get a written judgment. You just get guilty or not guilty. And here we got this 350-page document laying Irving quite low.
Yeah. The Professor Lipstadt, Manfred quotes you in his book on anti-Semitism. When one speaks about Israeli soldiers as Nazis, that is denial of what Israeli soldiers are and what Nazis were. Now, we're confronted with the day-to-day problem of being accused of being the modern Nazis. We're accused of that by Arabs. That's one of the favorite accusations of the Europeans. And certainly many Jewish anti-Semites have picked up on this one. and this implicitly involves an element of Holocaust denial. And I would be very, very thankful if you could relate to this according to your methodology and give us something to think about.
I don't know if everybody heard the question, but the comments is, of course, referring to Israel and Israeli soldiers as Nazis. It's the height of Holocaust denial. Whatever you think about Israeli policy, you can be totally against Israeli policy. You can think that the army has done terrible things. You can disagree with the destruction of houses. You can do and feel it's outrageous. You can feel it's a crime. To compare it in any manner, shape, or form to what the Nazis did is to deny the what the Nazis did. To call Sharon, no matter what you might feel about Prime Minister Sharon, and look at it in comparison to Hitler or things like that is repulsive. And I think it's just I talk about it, I write about it in the book a little bit towards the end, and I think it's an outrageous direction.
How would you take these people on?
You take these people on by challenging them. I mean, by writing about them and challenging them. But challenging them I think you get much further in a still small voice. Called the mama. You have some women asking questions when you haven't called one. Yes, right there.
Now that you've destroyed Irving's credibility, have you totally destroyed his reputation? Is he finished? And what are the ripples from this decision?
Have I totally destroyed his credibility? There'll always be people who would be willing to resurrect, but I think that I was in London 2 weeks ago, and I got into a taxi, and the taxi driver asked me what I was doing there and whatever, and I told him, and he said, "Oh, madam, he's toast." Burnt toast. I think his credibility is destroyed, but I don't think he'll ever be thought of as uncritically as he was thought of before. There are still people who like to think, except for the writings on the Holocaust, he has still what to tell us. John Keegan is his big defender. If you're a historian of World War I, II, you know John Keegan's name. One of the premier military historians. He's the defense correspondent for the Daily Telegraph in England, and he's Sir John Keegan. Has written very much respected books. He still thinks Irving, this Holocaust denial stuff, but Irving has what to teach us. When you see what he does with, one of the things we showed, by the way, during the trial is that Dresden, on the bombing of Dresden, Irving has lies all the way around the block. Irving was one of the first people to write about the bombing of Dresden, and in his different editions of the book, the number of victims kept climbing. First edition, he had 40,000, then he climbs to 80,000, 100,000. One point, he gets as high as 250,000. Now, Hiroshima, 80,000 lives were lost with the nuclear bomb device. Dresden was conventional bombing, so to think that a 250,000 people could be killed in conventional bombing in one night. This is not to say that what happened in Dresden was good, bad. It was right, good. It was never good. But but Irving keeps building up the numbers of victims, and then that was adopted and accepted by people as fact. So now that is also much more openly questioned. But there are defenders. And as a historian of as someone who studies Jewish history, never to be sure that that person is defeated and finished.
Yochanan Manoah